Yo, what's up, everyone? Welcome to our weekend grind here in Fantasy Basketball PH. This is your Fantasy Papi Roi, and we have our favorite show during weekends. I know it's getting into you guys. I can feel it. We have our Head3Head shows for today, but it's going to be just two of us. We're gonna expect more with our beloved NBA day-to-day fantasy Arik next week because our episode and our topic for today going through next week is going to be lit. It's going to be amazing. There's going to be a lot of stories, a lot of tips, a lot of sharing. So watch out. And then without further ado, I'm gonna pull in one of my bro chachos, NBA Fantasy Bible, D-Mac. What's up, D-Mac?
Roy, g'day mate. How are you?
Doing great. It's a little bit rainy here in the Philippines, but we don't care. We just won gold in the Asia basketball competition. I know you're gonna be proud of it as well. So
Absolutely, I saw that. That's huge. Yeah, first time in what, 6 decades?
exactly. And then we kind of like won very close in the last two games. So that was a nice win, especially against there was some rivalry with China, but of course I have a lot of Chinese friends. This is just to poke fun. You lost today, guys.
Yeah, sucked in.
I want to sink it. I want to sink all of the glory. Let's go, Gilas Filipinas. How about you, mate? How are you?
Yeah, doing well. Big day, big family day today. Had a few drinks as well, but calm now and getting back into the swing of things.
There you go. There you go. Have you drafted? I saw your post as well as Eric. You've been killing it in your drafts. How many drafts have you done in the past couple of days?
We're currently doing two slow drafts. So we've got the Locked On Fantasy Bowl League, and we've also got the FBI World Cup. So they're both slow drafts. I don't know that Eric himself gets quite frustrated with the slowness and the time taken in between picks, but I quite enjoy it. They're the only slow draft leagues that I have. They're quite refreshing. But yeah, going well, and just a few surprises, but nothing too outlandish.
And speaking of slow drafts, this is going to be our topic for today. We're going to be discussing our quirks, our stories, our strategies, tips, and all with regards to drafts in general. So there's a lot of aspects when you talk about drafts. We're gonna get all of the information from me, from you, and Eric on our part two. Because this is going to be an extended topic. If our audience are watching here, if you're a tenured GM, if you're a new GM, whatever you are, as long as you love fantasy, I'm pretty sure you're gonna enjoy our topic for today and for our part two. With that said, can you share your story? When did you start playing fantasy, and then what really what really enticed you in playing fantasy?
Yeah, well, relatively speaking, I'm fairly new in fantasy world, fantasy basketball. So I've been doing it for roughly 5, 6 years. So yeah, really new to the game. So started out, and it's actually my original league, which I'm still in now. So back in Adelaide in South Australia, one of my colleagues actually asked me, "Would you like to be involved?" And I had no idea what it was all about, but I liked basketball. I always enjoyed playing it. I loved watching it, and he did talk about how you actually enhance your enjoyment of the game by playing fantasy. So shout out to Dave Patterson back in Adelaide if he's listening. But yeah, so it just took on from there. So we had some leagues going, a couple of money leagues, and then it just grew into more of a love and an ambition to actually give you guys what we're trying to do at the moment, and just share our love and passion for fantasy basketball.
Yeah. It usually starts with friends, right? It's your childhood friends, it's either your office mates, right? Because
Yeah.
for me, my dog agrees. I can hear her barking. But for me, I started. I can't say as young or as late as you, but a little bit later than people expect, especially my some of my friends in fantasy basketball PH, because they thought I was playing since high school or college. I actually played when I went to Accenture, Philippines. So shout out to my IT friends there. So one of my best friend, Chris Penos from KPTV, which I am also playing with right now. We're actually drafting. Told shared to me how fantasy basketball works, and then it's just a matter of like buds talking about basketball and all, and then Filipinos to be your part Filipino. We have a joke here that everyone is analyst. Everyone knows a lot about basketball to the point that in any corner there's basketball court, and then every basketball fan, might it be young to the point that they're like old, has their own takes. So given that that's the dynamic in our community and in with my friends, I was immediately enticed of playing fantasy basketball like you are, and then yeah, played it using paper. I remember my first draft. I didn't know any references. Luckily for me, my friends aren't real friends in terms of fantasy. They want me to lose initially. So I went to a meeting board. We went like literally live draft. I bought I brought a paper thinking that I'm gonna get an information out of it because I'm seeing managers having or bringing their laptops or paper. I didn't know that there's already information there to choose. I didn't have anything. So I was like, but it's my pick. I was murmuring or asking information to the manager beside me. Hey, can I get? Can I look at your paper? I no ADPs, brother. No ADPs. I'm just picking players. And guess what? I actually won my first league. It was a Roto league, which actually motivated me to learn more about it, yeah, learn the craft and be a student of the game. So yeah, um, so we've kind of like shared some of our stories. Um, and when it comes
Actually,
to
I've
draft,
got a little bit further as well. Actually, we'll go back. It was 2015, I'm pretty sure, because I remember it was sort of around the time of the birth of my daughter, my first daughter. I've actually got two daughters. And I just remember going, I have this beautiful baby daughter, yet I am still so enticed and go and look at my ESPN, and we still use this platform, by the way, my ESPN app, just to check on my fantasy team. And, it's a little bit of just our way of thinking when it comes to fantasy basketball. We're obsessed. We become obsessive around our teams, and we're always checking it and looking at um, free agents and waiver wire pickups and those types of things. And we are quite obsessed with this sport, and I'll call it a sport because it's a fantastic thing that we do. Yeah, it does go back to 2015. I remember going through that with my second daughter as well, being in the hospital and occasionally checking my ESPN team at the time. It's a love of the game.
that's something that we need to be honest, because every time there's a regular season ongoing, our phones on the play fantasy. Every moment that we can check our phones, definitely we're scrolling, right?
Yep,
Always,
yep.
whatever the event is.
Well, the name of the original league that I entered, still to this day, is called the Mistress. And the reason why it's called the Mistress is because we're checking our phone so often, our significant others are thinking that we've got a mistress. So I love to tell you the name of that league because it's very true.
That's nice. That's nice. I love it. I might suggest that to one of our leagues, but yeah, that's pretty funny. Pretty funny. So when you started playing fantasy basketball, how did you progress in terms of how you draft players? I mean, because
Yeah.
we started off newbies, right? Definitely newbies, and then we
Mm.
kind of like build our preference, we build our style, we learn from competitions, we learned by researching. So how was your journey?
Yeah, probably similar to a lot of people that start out now. They look at general lists that are brought out by ESPN or Yahoo, just the general lists, and it'll give you some indication on the type of order that you should be thinking about picking guys, but it doesn't give you the nuances that we like as analysts. We like to give you guys. So it's a little bit of those resources, but also listening to podcasts. And when you do your searching for fantasy basketball, I guess the top two that come out obviously are people like Josh Lloyd, obviously Dan Vespers as well. They're the first two that I got really hooked on. And it did help because my commute each way to work was an hour. So it gave me plenty of opportunity to really get up to speed with fantasy basketball. So, yeah, they're the two voices of reason, or, the swaying opinions, I guess, when I was trying to decide on certain plays. And you'd have their opinions and sort of their styles of drafting, but also how to manage your team moving forward into the season. So, yeah, I think that was a good grounding, and a lot of people have probably heard of those guys as well. But for myself, they're the guys that I was able to learn from just by listening.
Yeah, I totally agree. And to be honest, I was late checking out Twitter and those podcasts. I started playing back, I guess around 2012-ish, 2011, 2012. And back then, I remember I am waiting in my NBA TV subscription with Rick Kamla's show. That's my only source. Rick Kamla, shout out to you. And then for the longest time, my friends knew Josh already, knew Lock on Dan Breswis, several more known fantasy analysts for Roto World, of course. Imagine I don't know that before. I really I'm just like I just love speaking, talking. I'm a little bit talkative in terms of NBA. So when we spend time in our eating or possibly in the smoking area, I just listen to them. And then the moment that I heard that name, Josh Lloyd, and I haven't heard about Dan Bestris yet. I was like shocked that this is existing. I was I'm like a caveman for fantasy. I don't know
Yeah.
Roto World. So I was like why is this why are these GMs no initially who is injured or whatnot. So I don't know Roto World back then. So yeah, it was like it's like me having a eureka moment and then knowing fire for the first time. So totally agree. Those two guys. Shout out to you, Josh and Dan. I actually was lucky to have guested them in my podcast early in the early seasons because I really reached out to them. To be honest, I really reached out to them. I wanted to learn more about them. I wanted to observe how they work. So I invited them to the humble podcast that I created during the COVID season, telling them that I need to bring you to the Filipino community because Filipinos are crazy gaga about basketball. So
Yeah.
they're kind enough to join me. So and then the rest is history.
And
What
they're
what
two of the best in the business. So, absolutely great gets to get them onto your show.
Yeah, exactly. Josh visited the show twice or thrice already, hoping
Yeah.
to add more. But yeah, we can do a H5H. So Josh or Dan is going to be
Yeah.
lovely. What's your first strategy when you started fantasy basketball? Do you already know how to punt and all?
No, I had zero idea. So it's literally looking at a list, going into a draft, pretty much following the list, going for guys that I knew of in terms of NBA lists and stars and whatnot, particularly at the top of the order. When it came down to round 11 and 12, that'd be guys that I'd have no idea about. But I guess over time, when you start analyze basketball, you analyze fantasy basketball. The beauty of that is you actually get to know the game a lot better. You get to know the role players and guys that are in the G League and those, the depth pieces rather than just the superstars. So not only has fantasy been an enjoyable game to play, but it's also enhanced my love of NBA as well.
Yeah, I remember only knowing the the first five and their six man. So
Yeah,
but
yeah. And for
but
me, it was sometimes it's not even the six man. It was really surface level, just the superstars. But yeah, that depth of knowledge is a lot greater these days.
one fun story I had when I started getting comfortable in the dynamics of playing fantasy was I actually had a championship. I won a championship in our office league, wherein um Jeremy Lin actually won me the whole thing because that's the first time I appreciated how waiver wire and checking and researching about the free agents really work. Because before I just thought it's like a draft only. I'm like super confident with my players. I don't count games. I don't care if they're injured or not. I don't have an idea on that. But because it was a Cinderella story, I already picked him up in his second game. I would like to thank DeMarcus Cousins for that because he was injured back then. So I had a reserve slot. When I saw Jeremy Lin, I just rolled the dice and then picked him up. And then since then, I really got the appreciation of, hey, you can actually win or you can make your team better by really playing the free agency, by really double checking whoever players people are dropping or whoever players there's a path of getting opportunities, because opportunities and minutes means usage means stats. So it's a
Absolutely.
little bit late for me, but it was again another eureka moment for my end. How about you? What are like the eureka
Yeah.
moments?
Yeah, it probably wasn't until the second season where I started learning about the tips and tricks after the draft. And I know we're in draft season at the moment, so and most of this episode will be around draft strategy. But yeah, like you said, being able to know when people are injured, Twitter is a wonderful thing. I think having Twitter and that's why a lot of the content that I put out is on Twitter because I think that is the most beneficial for people. If you give us a follow, you're able to then see who the best pickups are, what's right for your team, and those types of thoughts as well. So the use of Twitter in my second season actually really helped. I think I was able to get into the final that season. And again, this is only doing one league every year. So it was really just touching the surface. Third season is where I came into it. Knew about punting, actually went for a nice punt assist build. Ended up dominating that season. I think I went almost undefeated, maybe had one loss for the entire season. Yeah, that one was a really nice feeling. And actually, coming out of that draft, I was extremely confident that I would probably win. That's how well that draft went, and that was probably the only time that I felt as good as that about the rest of the season and my chances of winning the championship. So that was the ultimate draft for me. So I actually remember most of that roster actually.
Yeah, because now it's super competitive.
Mm,
Information is everywhere.
yeah.
I can't really say that this Jim is a newbie because he already has the basics, given that there's a lot of references that everyone can actually check. So in line with that, so we've talked about some history, right? So now currently, how do you approach punting? This is something that for me is always an interesting topic because some GMs goes to the draft thinking already that, hey, I'm gonna punt. On
Mm,
my end, I have a different take on it because I need to know first what is available at the moment. I'm gonna pick the first my first round pick. Then I'm gonna decide if I'm gonna punt. Because if you're lucky enough and eventually get the number one pick, and you've been preparing for punting for Yanis, and then you get Jokic, then it could be a problem because the mindset coming into the draft could startle you because there are specific names that you were prepared to draft, but it won't be applicable to that case. But yeah, I would just
absolutely.
want to hear your take.
Yeah, a lot of people subscribe to punting, and I think more often than not, punting will give you a better chance of winning your championship. But you don't have to punt, and sometimes it does depend on the settings of your league. So it's really important that you understand those settings because I've seen strategies and I've used it in the past where you can still win by having a leveled approach, a real balanced approach, rather than going for a hard punt. And the ability from that point on is if you have more transactions during the season, weekly transactions where you can pick up multiple guys to be able to then punt based on your head-to-head opponent, then you could have it by having your balanced approach. You can punt one way to be able to dominate your opponent for that particular week. Come the following week, because you've still got that balanced team, you're able to then make those transactions with waiver wire pickups and then punt a different way to then dominate your next week's opponent as well. So just because people say that punting is a great way of winning doesn't mean it's the only way of winning. So it does depend on your league settings, but more often than not, you do have a limited number of those weekly transactions and pickups. So punting does help. Punting absolutely must be used if you do want to have the best shot of winning when you have deeper leagues. So just because the pool of players is deeper, you do have to lean into a punt, and sometimes multiple punts. Two-level punt or a three-category punt as well is probably more beneficial for you. Again, that does come down on to your league settings and number of categories in your leagues as well. Obviously, punting is not applicable to points leagues, but keep that in mind with your category leagues as well. So it depends on your league settings, number of categories, how deep your league is as well.
And then I love that you pointed out that it really the comfortability of punting really somewhat relies on how deep your league is, because it's easier not to punt in shallower leagues, but it's more beneficial to punt in deeper leagues because you'll have limited resources of players, and then it's going to be hard to really target 7, 8 categories in a deeper league. But I'm not a very good Roto player. So since most of our content is about head to head, what can you say about punting in terms of Roto? Because I me personally, I have an assumption that I can balance my team as I compute or manage my stats as a team. Because I'm learning a lot with some of the friends that I kind of like knew in the past couple of years. Shout out to Papi, Jojo Legaspi, AJ Ong, Simon, Papi Nolly. Those are kind of like vets in our country. And when I observe how they pick in Roto, especially how a good friend of mine Jojo picks, he targets players that are already efficient, so it makes generally the whole team efficient. Me, since I'm also consider, because think about drafting efficient players, there's always something that you won't get out of them. You won't get the fun of the breakout players because most of the breakout players, not all, but most of sucks at field goal percentage and all, or TO and all. So I'm my personality doesn't fit the bill. So I thought of like, hey, why not draft good guards and then target solid FG bigs just to offset it. So again, I'm not really. I can honestly say I'm not really good at this. So I really love to hear from you. I was hoping to have Eric as well. We can ask him in our part two because I think
Well,
he's
Eric
the
is the Roto guy.
efficient. Yeah.
Yeah. I know he doesn't like me calling him the Roto guy, but he is the Roto guy. He's the Roto legend. And I know he subscribes to punting in Roto. When I have played Roto leagues, which again, similar to you, is infrequent, and I wouldn't say I'm an expert in Roto, but I tend to go for that more balanced approach and looking at guys that are efficient in both the categories of the shooting categories as well. I know that you can have success by punting, but it is a lot more difficult to win when you do punt. But again, I think this is something that we could probably take and pose to Eric with his experience and his success in the Roto. But I'm similar to you. I do prefer that balanced approach in Roto because it can then lead to difficulty in trying to make up those points in Roto when you do have a more obvious punt, like a harder punt.
Because when I try to analyze value and players per round, when we're actually drafting Roto, like for example, I know ideally I should have drafted someone like a Zach Collins, a John Collins, Bob Collins, because they're efficient bigs. Tito, Uncle Al, stuff like Jonas Valanciunas, efficient in free throws, but they don't block a lot. And then bef- I'll be reaching if I want them. I'll be reaching for Brook Lopez if I want that to happen. And that was like in my mind, seeing the Senguns, seeing the Okongus there, really, I don't know. It just pulls me in that no, Roy, just you drafted Trey Young. He can actually help out the Okongus, stuff like that. You drafted SGA, be confident. So there's always a voice in my head thinking
Yeah.
that way. And now I really can't confirm because I haven't really played a lot of Roto. So that's the reason why I have this urge to really learn how it works. But
Yeah,
yeah.
and I know a lot of people subscribe to Roto over head to head. I'm probably not one of those at this stage, but it does make it fairer because then the chances of you having catastrophic events later in the season, which impact you from winning your head to head, it's going to be less impactful with your Roto league as well. So if you've built up some nice points, it's less likely to kill you come end of the season during the silly season as well. So I like that component of it. I also like the fact that you're more focused on the per game rather than the ability for someone to stay on the court, particularly when it's a games cap Roto league as well. So someone like a Kawhi or a PG-13 or even a LeBron, so you know that they're going to miss games because you have a games cap Roto setting. You're more likely to pick them up earlier than you would in a head-to-head. So I do like that component because in that sense you do go for the better player, and it's more reflective of the superstardom levels as well. But I just love the buzz of the head-to-head each week, trying to dominate a different player week by week. I love that aspect of it, but don't get me wrong, I'm trying to become a better Roto player as well. So it's something that we can learn from Eric together.
Yeah, and then I think next year let's create a Roto league so we can actually spy on Arik and how he manages his
That's it.
team.
That's
Yeah,
it. Love to see how he does that.
learning by experience, right? And then learning by mentoring not indirectly. Speaking of punting, this is something that I always get when the community asks me. They are kind of like keen in a sense that they're having a little bit of a hard time deciding to punt or not to punt to specific players like a Jason Tatum, a Kevin Durant, even a Tyrese Halliburton. So I see their drafts. They want me to analyze how they did and all. And then in the back of my head, I'm kind of like thought that if they actually pick those type of players, I don't tend to punt right away. I try to salvage the efficiency. But I also thought that if it's a deep league, then it's going to be hard, right? So what's your thought about this? So imagine the first round, your first rounder is one of those efficient players, and then it's a 20 team league. So what's your plan going to the draft?
I tend not to think about punting after the first round pick. Come second and third, that's probably where I'm going to really lean into a punt. You may go into a draft thinking if I get a Halliburton, I'm probably going to punt points, but that may not be the case because if someone who provides second round, or sorry, in the second round with a high level of points, that means you've salvaged that. So you can then start to build on those categories, and maybe you're punting something else, maybe a big man category. So really, you don't really want to be thinking about punting after the first round. Having said that, if you are locked in on Giannis, I think the punt is clear which way you want to go with that punt because it does give you the best chance. And I like the punt using Giannis, and I've had success having Giannis in the first round and having that punt free throw build. But there are pitfalls with that as well, and you can actually get sidetracked to a point where you actually going to be behind the eight ball and trying to win your league as well. So you need to just be mindful of not punting too hard too early and just getting guys like Zion that fits that certain build too early as well, because then just because you can create an artificial value in someone doesn't mean you have to then take them at that level as well. You can wait, and that's where ADP data comes into play as well. So you need to be able to time it so that you still get value on those guys to suit your punt. But just back to your earlier question, I think it's detrimental for you to think about a punt more often than not after the first round pick. Come second round, I think that's where you can think about going into that punt and then solidify that come third and fourth round.
So with that said, um, what's your take with pairings? Because this is a content that our known fantasy analysts usually have every year. It's for me it's a little bit new because before there's no specific content about it. It's more of like they're kind of like just talking it organically. But now there's a specific content about it. There's like, hey, this episode is for pairings.
Yeah.
So how do you identify a good pairing? Because sometimes I understand the concept of it. I'm not having a hard time doing it. But for new GMs, it seems like if you have a good pair, say you have 4 rounds of good stats, and then when a player, say for example, you're not punting anything, and then a Rudy Gobert slides. So is it just a question of discipline? Because there's always a connotation that hey, available player, and then again,
Mm.
how so if that's the case, whatever your answer is, how important is the pairing prior to that?
For me, it's not important. I've never thought about pairing. I think old school, it's a very antiquated sort of notion, but old school is, let's say you picked up an elite point guard in the first round, a nice pair back in the olden days would have been, okay, well, let's get ourselves a nice elite center to pair with that point guard to cover all bases. I'm not of that opinion. I think um, in essence, you do pick the best player available, and then you can build your punt from your punt strategy, or you'll build your team build from that point on. So I'm not. I think it's really over focused on and overhyped in regards to the pairings, and something that's a little bit antiquated in this day and age. Particularly as now I think more of the focus is on positional or categorical scarcity. So you just need to understand, particularly this year, where I think I've said it multiple times, there are more big guys in the latter rounds, meaning that you don't necessarily have to pair a point guard with a center come round two. So I think if you can build out your strong points, your strong categories, and then you can pick and choose the moments where you then build based on how scarce or how prolific certain positions are, I think that's the better way to approach it, rather than having to pair certain position with a certain position in the first two, maybe three rounds.
You know what? I totally agree on that. And then on top of that, I really suggest for you to to check the per round players within that area, because understanding the positional and categorical scarcity is one thing, but planning ahead on the alternatives and which rounds are they available is another thing. It still doesn't depict the idea of getting the best available player. It's just like on the back of your head, if something happens in this area, you know you can actually get a possible similar value or a similar stat in this specific area. And
Mhm.
then while doing that, you check on the trend if there are runs, if there are basically if there are runs, and it's a lot of thing if you're doing it manually. Because my next question to you is, given that this is being considered ideally, how valuable is doing the draft using a tool versus doing it manually? Because here in the Philippines, we're not really adept to use tool. Me personally, I tried using the BBM tool like way back just once, like one season, and I wasn't able to really play around it. I want to learn more about it, of course, possibly next season, but I am just really comfortable doing it manually, just also because of me pushing myself to really do a lot of things in draft. But not everyone can do that. Not
Mm.
everyone is crazy, crazy like me. Where then I'm fine to be a bust in drafts just to learn and test something. But again, going back, um, I know you use a tool, so uh, tell us a story. How easy is this, or what are the perks?
Well, Roy, I've never used a draft tracker
Oh,
before.
really?
Yeah, I've never used it. So I'm like you. So I will go in, but I will also utilize projections that are available, and they are free as well on a lot of different sites. And I'll look and compare and contrast against ADPs beforehand. And ADPs is the best data that we can use in relation to where we think someone may be picked, and then also where we think their value is in terms of our specific build as well. So it does give you that powerful data to be able to shape your draft quite nicely. But I've never used a draft tracker. um, Essentially, I like to build out my roster and then look for guys where I feel I'm weak, based using the ADP data as well. An example at the moment is I talked about those two slow drafts I'm in at the moment. I've gone, particularly in one of the leagues in the FBI World Cup, I've gone really heavy on the punt field goals. So I think we're into round 8, possibly round 9 at the moment. I'm really lacking in center depth. So I've really built out my guard stats. So assists, points, obviously things that are going to be detrimental to my field goals, hence why I've built out a punt field goal strategy. But utilizing ADP data, I know that this is around the point where I need to start thinking about getting those guys to get my rebounds, get my blocks, and really hammer that in the next few rounds to be able to then help me in those other categories. I could have opted to go for a real hard 3-category punt, but I've chosen just to go for field goals. And depending on how I go in the next couple of rounds, maybe I do look at another punt. But at this stage, I'm only looking at punting one category at this stage. So I think, yeah, I don't use a draft tracker because I think I can get a sense of where I'm at, but also comparing it to some other teams as well. Number one, I look at my team, and number two, I may look at some other teams as well and looking at their strengths. But essentially, it's my team that I'm worried about.
So I love that you shared what is currently happening in your drafts, and I have a question about contemplating between need versus opportunity. Because now you understand that you need bakes, right? You mentioned about you know um trying to get that, and then I'm pretty sure prioritization wise, and if your beautiful mind in fantasy, that's the first priority, right? So how do you decide if a certain value player slides? Understanding that on the back of your head, you know that there's just a couple of bigs available there. And you check other teams, you know there's gonna be competition. But there's a good forward or good guard that slid to your lap.
Mhm.
So I just want to understand how you decide if on those type of situations.
Yeah, it's tricky. It's tricky when you do, and that's one of the pitfalls of having a punt build is that guys have slid and they're a great value, but they may not actually help you with your current build. I still like to take those value guys, not on the basis of me being able to then offload them for a trade, and we'll get to that shortly. But I don't think you can assume that you're able to trade because there's a lot of
Yeah,
leagues that don't ever have trades.
a
But
lot,
we'll talk about
a
that
lot.
shortly. But in the latter rounds, mid to late rounds, I like to look for team need and prioritize team need. But then if I do see someone that's dropped probably a couple of rounds and I think that's really good value, they're still going to be able to help my categories. I'm not punting that category, but if I pick this guy up, that'll help my points. But I'm still lacking in rebounds, then perhaps that's where I think about, and I mentioned it before, maybe that's where I go into a double punt. So you can be quite flexible with that on the fly because you've now picked up this great value guard who's actually helping you in the other categories solidify your position there. But now you start thinking about maybe bringing in another punt, which actually is quite a good strategy when it comes to, and like we said, with the deeper leagues or leagues that have more categories involved.
Yeah, and I just thought of another tricky and sticky situation. So we just talked about value, right? So how about position? Because sometimes, say, in your build, you since you're punting field goal percentage, I would assume that's a lot of cards that you have there,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then you see there's like good amount of centers. You're a little bit confident, yeah, I can get at least two of those or at most two of those. And then another guard comes in. So my question here is, depending on the site, right? So let's just use Yahoo as an example because that's like the usual preference of most of our audiences. Not sure, but in every poll, Yahoo always wins. Um, is 6 guards too many? Because you have guard, SG, and then the guard slot, and then two utilization. Again, it could depend on the slots, but let's just use the standard as like the reference. So I'm thinking in me, I'm thinking 5 is max. But say for example, a very solid guard. I can think of something that is kind of like hyped. I don't know, maybe with Jordan Poole, but it's hard to get 5 already in that round, right? But just imagine there's like you already got 5 guards. Do you still pick a good guard just because it's value? In your head, value fine. I can easily get that. But I already have 5 guards. So that's the tricky part. So what are your thoughts
Mm-hmm.
on that?
It actually came up in my league that I'm drafting. So I had gone for 3 straight guards. So I had, who did I go? Trey Young. Sorry, Trey Young was in the second. So I had first round was LaMelo, then Trey, and then I had FBV. So Fred VanVleet dropped to me in the third round. I was like, this is a great start, clear punt field goal strategy. But I knew I had no rebounds and I had no blocks. So at that stage, this is where I thought about, I probably need one of these bigger guys. Wemby had just come off the board. Eric sniped me. He got Wemby just before me. And this is where I did actually reach just because I needed to get those positions, but I also wanted to also solidify my other categories. So that's where I got Chet. So Chet was a reach in round 4. So I see him going in round 5, sometimes even round 6. But you look at my strategy, he's not going to kill my free throws. He's going to give me the blocks that I need, some solid rebounds. I don't care about field goals, and he's going to have okay field goals. He's not going to take me there, but I just actually don't care about it at that point. But I needed those big man stats because at that stage I wasn't comfortable with going into a 3 category punt. So that's why I did at that point reached, and some may even think that's not even a reach in the 4th round. If we were going for a balanced approach, I probably would have waited a little bit longer, but I thought that's not going to kill me in the draft. And later on, this is where the beauty comes into it with punts. You can, with that artificial value that you've built, you can then grab someone in the latter rounds like a Jordan Clarkson, even a Spencer Dinwiddie as well. So in typical standard rankings, they're a lot lower because of their field goal issues. However, I can get them past 120, 100, or maybe not for Dinwiddie, but I can get them in the 100 plus region. I didn't have to go and reach for some other guard. I'm able to still get that value, and they'll provide me with good assists in Dinwiddie, good points with Clarkson as well. So that's the beauty of it, and that's where I think you need to really look at your team build and play to that strength. But also don't reach too high or it's going to kill your value as well. And I thought Chet at that point, I think he's going to be close. It's not going to provide me huge value, but it's actually going to help my team with its build.
Yeah, and in my recent Q&A episode, I was actually kind of like giving a statement wherein I'm telling my this is just my thoughts. I'm telling everyone that the moment you draft at least the first 2 players, for me, ADP is trash because everything gets skewed depending on what you have. If you're already in line with punting a certain category, then that ADP that you see in the app that doesn't apply to you already. You have to recognize that because if not, there's a psychological effect of really seeing the names of the players there and you not prioritizing what you already have, which is the top drivers of your team, which is your first to third round maybe. But a question that I have that you already mentioned earlier. Say for example, a lot of good players slid. Do you intentionally draft them for trade value? Because sometimes there are GMs that thinks that way. Wherein, oh, I missed out on this, I missed out on this. Oh, let me just get all of the guards, or let me just get all the bigs, or get all the best available. And then,
Yeah.
after the draft, they chat, hey guys, you want centers? Just ping me.
Yeah, yeah. I mentioned it earlier. You can't assume that any trades are going to go down. So that's fraught with danger having that approach, unless you know your teammates or sorry your league mates, and it's a massive trading sort of league. Um, unless you know that, I think it's fraught with danger to go in with that mindset. So buyer beware. Just be mindful that maybe a trade can't be pulled off as well, and other people can see straight through that as well. So that's not going to fit your build. Then immediately after the draft, you're sending out trade requests. It is fraught with danger. So just be mindful.
For me, because I love trades. It's the first thing that I really loved when I learned how to play fantasy basketball. I haven't really done that in the past couple of seasons because I was a little bit busy. But for me, if you've studied the league enough, like you mentioned, profiling your GMs, as well as monitoring the diversification of the players that they drafted, it could be a good idea to monopolize positions because in contrary to what you mentioned about you're not sure about playing. If it's a deep league and then you really monopolize something, I'm pretty sure they would trade for that player, right? You can actually create a market for it. But thing is, it doesn't make it doesn't mean that you get a good trade partner. So that's the variable there. Another thing is, remember in trading, it's called trade for a reason. So sometimes if you're eager to get good value out of it, you might actually help out a team that you'll eventually face in the future that is going to be stronger than you. So for me, we will definitely create a different episode about trading. But yeah, I definitely get your point. It's guys, if you're that type of GM, you have to really tone it down because every year, D-Mac, every year I always get to play with someone like that. Every after, every after chat. Hi guys, you got guards? Talk to me. But yeah, it's fun. It's fun
I'm
having.
like you. I love trades, and I used to be the person in our league that would always send trade requests, and I became infamous for it as well. I've toned it down in my latter years, and I've used a different approach. And actually, trading can be beneficial. You don't have to go out and try to screw someone over and going, "Wow, I've got this 2-for-1 trade. It's going to benefit you." Well, actually, it could actually benefit both teams, depending on again with your punt strategy. You're building that artificial value. Well, both sides are a winner from a trade.
Yeah, yeah. And then uh since this is going to be a two-part, right? A topic that I would like to heavily discuss before we kind of like part ways for this part one. Um I want to talk about reaching and playing it safe. Because
Mm.
this is something that really gets the attention in every league that you draft. That there's always one that has this tendency to really reach every every round. It's like, oh, I'm gonna get Wembanyama, I'm gonna get Chet Holmgren. There's always one GM, right? But sometimes they win, you know, and then sometimes you get jealous in a sense that they're kind of like really happy with what they draft. They're bragging after the draft, like, hey, I got my guys and all. So
Yeah.
when is the right spot to reach? And then when is the right spot to pick safe players? Because there's like a contention, or there's like a an understanding that go safe initially, and then latter part you look for upside. Totally fine. I think everyone should already know that. But sometimes, say a safe player comes in that has value in the latter part. And then when I'm trying to think about it, safe isn't really bad, even though they don't have upside. Especially the old ones. There's a lot of good old players in the late rounds. Like for example, if a Bogdan Bogdanovic is available there, it's for me it's he's really good in terms of getting certain stats. So people think he is safe. That's why he slides, right? So yeah, I just want to. I know that's a lot of things that I mentioned, but yeah, talk about preaching and picking safe.
Yeah, I think you mentioned in one of our early episodes, I think you picked up in our mock draft, did you pick up Harrison Barnes? And I went to town on that guy and there's
Yeah,
no upside. But then your counter to that was he's safe and it gives you the opportunity to earlier go and reach for someone who's a little bit more hype. So actually, it's not a bad mindset as well. It's a good strategy. But I'm probably more a traditionalist where you do go safe in the first couple of rounds. Potentially in the third round, you go for someone like a Kawhi who's or someone else who's supposedly injury prone but could perhaps get you that first round value, but could be seen as a bit of a reach. But if you get two out of your first three to be safe and then maybe reach for that third one, I think that's a good strategy to start the draft. And then in the latter stages, I think a combination of maybe a reach here or there and some safe players as well in chunks, as opposed to, well, in round 10, I'm going to go safe, and in round 11, I'm going to go for a flyer. I think looking at it in chunks of rounds rather than individual rounds could be the way to go. And I haven't thought about it in great detail, but I think that's probably where we may go in future discussion.
yeah. And then you mentioned about some something about the early rounds, right? If you pick a Mikal Bridges or an Anton Edwards ahead of Kyrie Irving and Anthony Davis and
Mm.
players like that, is that considered reaching? Because me, I don't consider it as reaching, but I get some comments that they kind of like consider that reaching.
I don't think it's reaching, but it could be an issue if your other picks in the first 3 or 4 rounds are also going to be guys that have some risk. So if you were to have AD, Kyrie, and then Kawhi, then for me that's too much risk to carry in your first 3 picks. But if you were to have Kyrie, AD, and someone who's a little bit safer in the third round, perhaps a Fred VanVleet or someone of that ilk, so I think that would be okay. It just depends on how you fill that first 3, maybe 4 slots out. You don't want to be reaching for all of these picks and go, look, I've reached the first couple. I may as well just go out with a bang and just try to smash it out of the park. I think you still need to be balanced in that approach as well. Essentially, the key to winning your championship is getting value, um, but it doesn't have to be value picks every single pick. You can be safe, and then you can hit it out of the park with 1 or 2 picks, maybe even more, and then that gives you the impetus to build a nice foundation for you to win your league. So you don't have to be going for these sleepers every single time and reaching to get let's say, I don't know, Keegan Murray in the 7th round because you think he's going to take off this season. You don't have to do that. Um, if you've played it safe, then it's a consideration, but you don't have to do it every single round.
Yeah, and if you're in a deep league, D-Map, and then just because I kind of like noticed in the past couple of leagues that I have right now, and even in Max, people are really wary about players that has historical injury and are
Mm.
aging. So
Mhm.
they are kind of like reaching the Mikal Bridges, the Anthony Edwards of the first rounds, right? So what would you suggest if you're in a, for to our viewers, if they're in a deep league and then they're put into a situation that there are available players with risk, but are solid per game players that has a potential to be a top 5 players? Because for me, that's always important when you're trying to contemplate in the first couple of rounds. There should always be a question of, hey, can this player be a number one top or at
Mhm.
least a top 5 player? Because for me, it kind of like really guides you in the decision. So, what do you usually do? Do you stick with the players with some risk, maybe depending on your preference, or do you go safe? Because we're talking about safe, and go to the players that you a little bit younger, and then if you check, like for example, a Mikal Bridges, he's one of the new Iron Man of fantasy. So, what's your thoughts about that?
What is it? Josh Lloyd's famous saying they're Iron Men until they're not. So who knows what's going to happen
Yeah,
with McCall? He doesn't have first round upside for me, and I tweeted this the other day. He's a popular mid-second round pick at the moment. For me, he's that's his absolute ceiling. Mid-second, late second is his absolute ceiling. So in that stage, I like to go for guys that do have that first round value because, again, you're creating that value, and that's the key to success as well. So I'm more of the opinion that you go for the guys that will get you the higher level of value to a certain degree. And again, you don't want to be doing that every single pick where you're going to go Kawhi, AD, LeBron. You don't want to be doing that all the way through. But if you have 1 or 2 of those picks, I think it's fine because then if they do stay healthy, let's say Kawhi plays 65 games, unlikely, but if he does, you're in a wonderful position. If you were to pick him up in the third round,
yeah,
you're even in the second round, you're in a great spot.
totally agree, totally agree. I guess I guess something that most of us fantasy analysts doesn't consider a lot is the preference and comfortability of most of our GMs, because we're talking about stuff in an ideal or in a vacuum perspective, right? Because in reality, it's really easy to to punt and then or do counting stats in drafts, because especially if you don't use tool, it's it's just like, hey, whoever comes to my lap, I'm gonna get him. In comparison to really considering, hey, uh, I have to check the percentages. There's a certain knowledge and exposure that, for me, needs for you to be really efficient in doing that approach. So
Mm.
I'm thinking it's probably the reason why, despite a lot of good references, at the end of the day, come fantasy draft, most of the GMs like, hey, scrap what I learned. I'm gonna do this, right?
Yeah.
So yeah,
And earlier I did say I didn't use the draft tracker, but I definitely use tools. And I highly recommend that if you want to get ahead of the competition, particularly if you're in a league that has a couple of casual participants, that you start using these tools and you use it during your draft. Um, but I don't necessarily use a specific draft tracker, but utilizing these tools such as the projections, using the punt assistance as well, they're valuable as well. You have that side by side with the ADP data. You go a long way into then picking your guys and the guys that will give you that value to then lead to success.
there you go, there you go. So guys, we've talked a lot of things, and then we're really aiming to create the continuation of this episode, because I really want to talk about a lot of things, but I think it's going to be better if we also have Eric, right? So let's park that in part two for a moment. Let's just end this episode. It's already an informative episode. I love it. Um, with, give me your fantasy basketball starter pack.
Mm.
If you're if there's a certain GM, hey D-Mac, you're my idol. I want to learn from you. What's your fantasy basketball starter pack that you'll definitely share to that person?
Yeah, I actually had a couple of people reach out to me on Twitter. They didn't call me an idol, but they did ask for some advice. So I directed them to a couple of websites that do have these projections, and not everyone has the money to be able to pay for these, but there are some really good tools that are free as well. So utilize those sites, and I can mention those on Twitter. I won't mention it here, but utilize those sites. It'll help you just to understand where guys could be projected in terms of minutes and opportunity. That's a wonderful thing. But also utilizing the ADP data. And again, a couple of these sites do have that ADP data. Even Yahoo has it available. So understand where players are being picked in drafts. And that's key, because when you do get into that draft situation, being able to have some mocks behind you as well, leading up into the real draft, is going to be invaluable, because you'll know when certain players are probably going to be taken, and then you're able to practice certain builds. So do a lot of drafts, a lot of mock drafts before you get to the real thing. So that's another key. So have the tools, utilize the lists, look at the ADP data, and do a lot of mocks and practice different variations in different positions. So if you see if you can pick from 2, see if you can pick from 1, see if you can pick from 12. Go through all 12 positions, and then that sets you up for all of your drafts as well. So if you only have one draft and you know what position you're picking from, make sure you do all your mock drafts from that position. But more often than not, we have multiple leagues. So be able to practice drafting from all the different slots, and then try different builds as well. Try to go for a balanced approach, or try different builds and just see how it feels for you. There's not one that's better than the other. I do have my favorites, but again, that comes down to execution. All of them can be valuable. All of them have their advantages, but also a lot of them have their pitfalls as well.
There you go. There you go. For me, almost the same thing. I'm just gonna add. So we're good. Well, first and foremost, we're gonna wait for that tweet. I'm pretty sure whoever is listening and watching right now is going to check out D-Mac's tweet later or tomorrow with regards to the suggested sites and
Mm.
references that he'll be sharing. For me, I'm
Well,
just
I
gonna
think most
add.
people are aware of basketball mods, so that's
Yeah,
a pretty well-known one. Hashtag basketball is one that I love to use as well. And there's a couple others that I'll tweet about. And again, sometimes it's a bit of a comparison, and it's interesting to see that not all of them are aligned. They're all quite similar, but they're not aligned, and I guess that's the beauty of fantasy basketball.
exactly, exactly. And then for me, just gonna add the day-to-day fantasy by Eric, of course. So this is shout out to you, our bro Chacho, Eric. Because in our next episode, I'm gonna let him discuss how he built this app. Because he's the only person here that actually created with this colleague an app. So I'm pretty sure he really spent effort and time to analyze how to gauge and uh, um, um, put in a list considering a lot of things, right? So I love to pick his brain about this. So
Yeah.
guys, definitely download the day to day fantasy app. And then just to piggyback on D-Mac there, in terms of mocks, for me it's a must because you get a feel of what's a possible situation that you'll be into before the draft, right? Something that I suggested earlier because I was doing the live Q&A and then I just saw my Outlook that I have a meeting in my day job. So I needed to stream it down. And then there's a lot of deep league questions. So my general advice was, guys, go ahead and do max. I know it's in Yahoo, it's up to 14 only. So my strategy doing max is if you're gonna play an 18 to 20 dip, just do a max in the 14 team in Yahoo, then don't pick the next 12 players available to you. So that's gonna push you to really build something that you because if you do a 14 team mock and your actual drop is 18 to 20, it's not gonna work. The players that you get there, you won't get it, right? So the suggestion there is first 10 to 12, don't pick it. As much as hey, this one's lead. That's is that gonna happen in reality? That's too deep, 18 and 20. It's too deep for from 14. So I suggested do the max, count the first 10 in your screen or 12, don't draft them. Try to create a team, try to push yourself creating a team out of scrap. I can't say scrap, but out of players that possibly within their ADP, you're not almost getting value. But you'll be surprised, you can still get value. And that's the reason why we are here because we're actually sharing some thoughts and some hidden values and then players that aren't really appreciated. And to top up our episode, this is something that I suggest we're gonna do moving forward. Every episode, let's think of a player that you want to just talk about before ending the show. Maybe it's a player that you just noticed now out of a news or something, and then that you kind of like were that got your attention. That hey, maybe I should consider this. So let me start off with with my player. So people aren't really uh, looking at Jaden McDaniels right now. He's been an afterthought for a while. I understand there was a frustration in drafting Jaden McDaniels. I have him in my dynasty because there's always a good upside for Jaden McDaniels. But there's a lot of usage players in Minnesota to the point that the only thing he brings to the table is of course efficiency. Not heavy on defense, to be honest. Mostly it's not as heavy as like the Herb Jones, right? Type of players. And he only brings 3 points. He doesn't really score a lot. But to be honest, in that area, if you're not punting, I think he's one of the low key upside players. Because again, he's still young, and then apparently what he brings to the table is really important on what Minnesota needs. One new information that I got uh that pushed me to talk about Jaden McDaniels was how he played Luka Doncic in the past game. Uh Minnesota is really confident and comfortable with their wing defense. For me, putting Jaden McDaniels there is going to be important because the switches that they have, especially the moment Anton Edwards plays, is going to be more fluid if there's Jaden McDaniels. And on the flip side, when in the offensive side of the things, he can actually knock down threes. So given that, people aren't really noticing Jaden McDaniels, maybe someone that, might end up picking. He's a little bit cheap right now. So yeah, I just want to share that. How about you, Dim?
I love that. I love that. Mine's a little bit more hyped. I spoke about him, actually tweeted with you yesterday,
Oh
Anfernee
yeah.
Simons. So yeah, it just the more and more I think about it, and the more I look at the rotations, I think he's going to be, if he's not the number one, he's going to be in the top two usage players in Portland. And I think we've seen it in the past when Dame had his injury issues. We just saw him go off. Anfernee Simons was absolutely stunning. He had a couple of 40-point games. His scoring is immense, his three-point shooting, and he can provide sneaky assists as well. So I think he's long, so he could get more rebounds. He doesn't provide the rebounds that you'd expect for someone so long, but he does have that scope to improve. Yeah, well, they've got Scoot. We talked about the other guys on the team as well. You've got DeAndre Ayton dominating that will pick up more usage as well. Brogdon is still on the team at the moment. So, yeah, there's a bit of competition, but I can still see him standing apart and standing himself apart from the other guys as well, just as that primary scorer. And as we know, scoring or points is one of those statistical scarce categories. So it's something that I like to target. So I think he could be a top 15 NBA scorer this season. I think that's really valuable. So something to keep an eye on. Yes, his field goals could hurt you, but again, in my current build with the field goal punt, isn't of concern. So consider him as well. I think he's definitely going to be a consideration for top 50 player. His current ADP is around that 60 to 70 region. So at the moment, not a great deal of value, but if he tends to slide, make sure you pick him up because I think he's going to have a huge season this season.
And to piggyback on that, remember how D-Mac sampled Tyrese Halliburton earlier, wherein he lacks points and then you have to really strategize in getting points. Pairing and Anfernee Simons, the latter part of the draft, could be beneficial. So what I'm trying to say here is there will always there's going to have there's always gonna be a way for you to really patch things up. The only thing is it really would pay to give time and watch our show. No, I'm just trying to check out references and do maps, right? So yeah, it if you want to win, it's pretty simple. If you want to win fantasy, it's really rare that you aren't prepared and then you'll dominate the whole league. And then that's the reason why we're here. We us three, banded together because we were kind of like magnetized with the passion that we have with fantasy basketball. And then that's the reason why we're kind of like really sharing it to you guys. So I hope you love this episode because me, I personally, I really enjoyed it. I loved it. And then we talk. If you want to check out more, some of the exchange that we had with Anfernee Simons, check out D-Mac's tweet. So we had I kind of like acted the devil's advocate, like the Jeremy Grant and Malcolm Brogdon will eat the utilization. So it was fun. It was fun and
Yeah, it was really
realistic
good.
as well,
It's really
right?
good.
Yeah, it could happen.
Absolutely
Who knows,
realistic.
right?
Yeah, it
Yeah,
could. It
and
could.
that's the reason why I love this kind of discussions because you there's always an angle that we might not see that some of us sees and then we learn from them. So we're friends. That's totally fine to disagree, sometimes disagree, and then and then push each other's back to the corner because we
And it's
learn
interesting
from each
discussion
other.
at this point of the preseason. I think there's a lot of things to be worked out, and these are the type of debates that we love at this point. And it'll be clearer once we get to the start of the season. But of course, our drafts happen before that, so just keep that in mind. Look at some preseason games if you can, and sometimes that can give you sort of the insights into how the regular season will start as well.
There you go. There you go. So again, Dimac, share anything that you plan move later or within this weekend. Anything you
Yeah,
want to plug?
Yeah, just hit me up, NBA Fantasy Bible. If you want to DM me, we can have a conversation. If you just want to tweet at me, let's get it going. Let's keep the grind going because it's not long now until the regular season starts. I cannot wait.
Exactly. And then, of course, you can see me at Fantasy Basketball PH podcast. This episode is going to be uploaded tomorrow. So wait for that. And then it's going to be extended next week with a part two. Maybe earlier, depending on Eric's availability. Eric, we miss you, man. I hope when you watch this, you'll definitely enjoy it, and at least bring you smile for a couple of moments, right? And then,
Absolutely.
yeah, guys, happy weekend. NBA is almost there. So we are going to help you out. Watch out to the upcoming episodes. By the way, if you have any suggestions of any topic that you want to for us to discuss, or if you have a question for us to kind of like a mailbag question that we can do, totally just let us know so we can talk about it. So again, D-Mac in the house, Papi Roi in the house. Happy weekend, guys. Bye.
Thanks, guys.